Hi, friends, and happy Pride. At least I really hope it's a happy Pride for you. There is a lot going on this year. So, for me, Pride isn't all about the parades and stuff because I'm not a big I'm not a big crowd person. So what I often spend my June doing is looking at queer films. And I want to tell you about one of my favorites. It is a quirky, small, low budget film from the 90s. Canadian quirky, small budget film from the 90s. It's going to be hard, might be a little difficult for you to come across. You might have to hunt a little bit. But I think if you can get a hold of it, you'd really enjoy it, and maybe you'll get something out of me talking about it anyway. Because I want to talk about this film that is so 90s, so Canadian, and so Sapphic that the title comes from a Sarah McLachlan lyric.
Your love is better than chocolate.
So this is sort of a sweet little vignette of Sapphic life in Vancouver in the 90s. So the idea for this film began in 1993 when writer Peggy Thompson and one of the producers, Sharon McGowan, were at a writing retreat. And they dared each other to write a lesbian coming out story that ended happily and didn't get into any of the typical celluloid closet Hollywood tropes. Which is not to say that this film doesn't have tropes, because it definitely does. But they're queer tropes. That's the thing. This film is entirely told from the queer lens. There is no straight gaze here. And that's gaze with a Z, for the record. And it's also entirely told from the woman's perspective. Writer, producer, and director were all women. And it's a love story. It's the story of a couple pairs of lovers, actually. The main one, I said there were queer tropes. The main one literally do move in together on their first date. So let me introduce you to Maggie. Maggie is a young, idealistic lesbian artist and college dropout who is working in a gay bookstore and performing at the local lesbian bar. One night, Maggie is accosted by the local skinheads, who are a bit of a thing in this film, and she is rescued by someone in a van that resembles a certain moving company. Distinctive U-Haul-esque vibes, but fully covered in art, because it is being driven by our young, soft butch girl Kim here, who is your wandering artist. And the next day, when Kim and Maggie start talking, there is an instant connection, so much so that while they are getting to know each other in Kim's art U-Haul, they are so enraptured that they don't notice that Kim's getting towed. And with the van towed, they have no choice but for Kim to move in with Maggie on their first date. But there's a problem, because Maggie's mom is coming to town with her brother, because Maggie's mom, Lila, has just been left by Maggie's stepdad. And of course, Maggie isn't out to her mother and doesn't know how to. And her mother is very sweet, but utterly clueless. And when I say clueless, like, Maggie is subletting from the local safe sex educator, and the house is just dildos, 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 dildos. And the mother does not notice. So that's the first couple. We have young, idealistic, in love, and just very sweet pair of artists. And then the second pair we have is Frances and Judy, who are middle-aged, and they are the two disaster queers who are clearly into each other and can't get out of their own ways to get together. Like I said, there are tropes, and they are our tropes. They are queer tropes. So Frances and Judy. Let's talk about Judy, because she steals this film.
Mrs. Squires will do nicely.
She's not my favorite character. That's Frances. But Judy steals this film. So Judy was the second sympathetic trans character that I ever saw on film. The first was Bernice from Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. That was in 94. This is in 99. And unfortunately, Bernice and Judy were both played by cis men. It's unfortunate because it would be so much more authentic to have a trans woman playing this role. But especially she has a song.
I'm not a fucking drag queen. When you say good day, sir, you stab me all the way through my tender transgender heart.
And it would be so much more authentic if it was a trans woman singing. The actor in this case is Peter Outerbridge, and he does clearly do his best to play her with sympathy, with empathy, to play her as the woman that she is, that she has fought hard to be. But still, there would be more authenticity if this was a trans woman in the role. But she isn't a parody, and she isn't tragedy. She's a warm, loving woman, and she does kind of steal the show. When Judy hears Maggie talking about her mother, Judy correctly guesses that Lila must be very lonely. And so she goes out of her way to befriend this new person who is just newly divorced and a bit lost. And Lila, being the naive housewife straight off the prairies that she is, it doesn't occur to her to question Judy's womanhood, which in a lesser film, especially in a film that was done by the straight gays, this could have been one of those things where they make it a source of comedy, and a bad comedy, that there is a woman who doesn't realize that she's talking to a trans woman. This film doesn't go there. There's, we smile at Lila's naivete, but really there comes across as these two women bonding, these two older women bonding, to, comparing and discussing femininity, something that they both know a bit about, what it means to be a woman in a world that has such rigid definitions of femininity. And, as a gender studies person, this is one of the things I really like about this film, particularly as I watched it in the 90s when it came out, and watching it now, the seeing a sort of different perspective on womanhood and femininity and how things have changed. Lila is of the generation of the second wave, and that second wave has changed, between when she got married, which would have probably been in the 70s, and where she is now in the 90s, has changed the world significantly. But she wasn't of the second wave. She was a housewife. She was a traditional woman. We see that she is a person who was told that, the role of woman was to, be wife and mother and sacrifice her entire self to that. And that would give her some stability. But here she is coming to middle age and discovering that no, there is no stability for that. Her years of housewife, diligent, service to her husband didn't stop him from going off and picking up a younger woman. And so she has nothing, because she gave her life to him and the kids. She has nothing left for herself. She has nothing left but herself. And we see that she has been taught, we see her repeat stuff that she's been taught to have no value for herself. It's all she has, and yet she sees no value in it. And when we put her in contrast with Judy, when we put her in conversation with Judy,
housewives, homemakers, as we're now called, aren't supposed to have existential crises.
I think homemakers have existential crises all the time.
Someone who has given everything to be herself, has sacrificed more than we can possibly know, more than they can possibly show on screen. But you feel it, you know that she has sacrificed everything to be herself. And so there are these two women in a friendship together with such differing perspectives on womanhood and on life. There are a lot of films that might present this friendship from Lila's perspective and have Judy be the support character, the friend there. But this film chooses to be, to make this an equal friendship and to particularly keep us on the side of Judy. So when Judy is outed, as we sort of expect that to happen at some point in the film, it is Judy's reaction that we stay with, not Lila's. It's not unsympathetic to Lila, this person coming to terms with new information, but it's not gonna be forgiving of her or stick with her. We know that this is a thing she needs to get over. This is the thing about it being wholly uninterested in the straight gaze, is the straight characters we see them all through the eyes of the queer characters, through their experience. So they are prejudiced, but we're not forgiving of the prejudice. We're understanding with Lila, less so with the cafeteria owner who, is all happy and friendly as long as he doesn't have to see anything.
No, there's no kissing. No kissing here. You want a kiss? Go someplace else.
It's not doing a Disney-fied sort of, let's imagine that these people have no problem at all. No, they have a problem with queerness. They have prejudice. They come from this world, and it is realistic that they would have prejudices. And they need to get over it. And that's, a realistic way of looking at this.
I'm too old for this.
No, you are not too old.
But much as I love Judy, my favorite character is Frances. Frances is the woman of Judy's dreams, and she's also a really awkward nerd, and I love her. She feels very much like a chaos spy. We should find out if she has ADHD too. She feels like one of us, but I will take her word for it. It's not textual. She is Maggie's boss, and she runs the gay bookstore. Throughout the film, Frances is in a fight with customs. And this is where I get to tell you a little bit about Canadian queer history. And I get to introduce you to some bona fide Canadian queer history heroes. Okay, gay bookstores. See, in the days before the internet, setting the stage, in the days before the internet, there were two sort of institutions of queer community. There were the gay bars, gay and lesbian bars, leather bars, the bar scene. And there were bookstores. Bookstores that would sell music and zines and magazines and queer studies books, art, and porn, and sex toys, safe sex manuals, and would give demonstrations and would be a meeting place for the community. And particularly, during the time of AIDS, would be a really good resource center, obviously, for people who needed accurate information. And naturally, they tended to run into problems with the authorities. And in Canada, the particular authorities that the trouble was with was customs. Because, as you can imagine, a lot of what they were selling was published in America or Europe or the UK. And so it would have to come through customs to be stopped, right? The rule was the customs people could stop what they felt was obscene. So I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about freedom of expression and, all the First Amendment stuff. But remember, this is Canada. We have a different constitution. Our First Amendment is actually the formation of Manitoba. No, what we have is a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And under the Charter, our right to freedom of expression isn't absolute. There are limitations if necessary for the public good. The question is, how do you interpret for the public good? It's supposed to be the yelling fire in a crowded theater thing, right? But what happened in the 80s and early 90s is a lot of anti-pornography activists argued to have porn and obscenity judged as needing to be limited under this public good rule. It was actually seen as a feminist thing because feminists of the second wave, many of them were anti-porn. They saw it as inherently degrading to women, the industry as inherently exploitative, and they saw it as creeping into other media. And so their response was to seek to ban it. Not to try and regulate the industry, not to make a, media literacy kind of argument, or, something that would be not the blunt tool that is banning a thing and bringing in law enforcement. And, I don't think of the feminists who called for that as bad people. I think they saw things from a very particular lens and, clearly felt degraded by a lot of what they saw in, heterosexual media particularly. I think it comes down to a blunt tool like law enforcement. And also, if you find yourself on the same side of something as the religious right, you need to take a step back. And to get these legislation across, they partnered with the religious right. And the outcome of this was that bodies like customs had a lot of leeway to decide for themselves what they thought was obscene. And so what they did was hold literature that was meant for gay bookstores. But I said there were queer heroes in this story, and there are. Meet Little Sisters Book and Art Emporium in downtown Vancouver, which at the time was owned by Jim Deva and Bruce Smythe. And in 1990, they filed a claim against the government for being targeted by customs with all this. And oh my God, did it take a long time going through the courts. In 96, the courts ruled in their favor. But it wasn't until 2000 that it was seen by the Supreme Court of Canada, who said that the onus to prove something was obscene was on customs and not on the recipients. And, they won. This was a big victory. And a mark in the March for Queer Rights in Canada. If you can find it, I highly recommend the documentary Little Sisters versus Big Brother that documents this entire case. So with Better Than Chocolate coming out in 1999, you can see why they gave Frances this subplot. This experience of dealing with customs was a part of gay life at the time. This was a struggle. And it is, in terms of narrative structure and those aspects of filmmaking, it is kind of a downside in this film that it doesn't have a satisfying resolution on that subplot. What resolution can it have while this issue is still ongoing? So it becomes a bit of a driving background conflict. And I think apart from it being a plot point in the film, I think that the situation with customs, in fact, sort of explains a lot about the lens that this film has, because this film is entirely unashamed both of queer life and of female sexuality. There's a line where Frances says,
Yeah, it's obscene. That's the point.
I think that's sort of what the film is doing. You know, it's like, if you're going to claim that everything that we are is obscene, then we're just going to be honest about what we are. And if you find it obscene, that's your problem. And then also, they made it incredibly wholesome. So this is a film with, quite a bit of nudity, female nudity, and yet it's not male gazy. It's not, it's rather wholesome. It is a masterclass on what we would call the female gaze. It is using it. Well, female gaze in this case this is kind of a pun. It's gaze and gaze, because it is, very much sympathetic and internal and very sweet, while also being very honest. And there's also sex toys absolutely everywhere. Dildos. Just
Better homes and dildos.
And this is in 1999. This would have been kind of shocking. But can you be shocked when it's portrayed so wholesomely? We just have sort of a commitment to an authentic, honest portrayal of female queer experience. One of the things that is very real, but also leads to inauthenticity in this film, is that the bi character is also presented through a gay lens, and a prejudiced gay lens. So we have a bi character who is sexually aggressive to the point of feeling predatory, to the point of having a relationship with a 17-year-old boy, Maggie's brother. So that is not good. But it is unfortunately authentic to the way that some gay people see bi people. So this is a realistic part of our world and our community. And I wish we were, I wish we could be commenting on that. And this film does not comment on that. It just perpetuates it, which is a mark against the film. But on the subject of being authentic, there is another aspect of the community that it shows. Because we see that Judy not only faces prejudice from the people outside of the community, she also faces it within the community. There's a common trope with representations of trans people in media where, particularly when they are filmed for the straight gaze, there's a thing of having them look in mirrors all the time. It's a sort of way to try and convey gender dysphoria to people who don't really experience it. So you'll see someone looking in a mirror trying to look more womanly or being uncomfortable at how not womanly or not manly they look. The only mirror shot in this film is Judy just going about her business and putting her makeup on when she's spotted by someone else, when she's spotted by a bigot. And unfortunately, this happens in the bathroom of the lesbian bar. So we have not just prejudice, but bigotry brought right down home in what should be a safe space. Doubly a safe space because it's a lesbian bar. It's a gay bar. It's supposed to be our safe spaces. And it's a bathroom, which should be a safe space. But we all know that it's not right now. Certainly not for trans people. And it is showing us in 1999 that it wasn't safe then either, even if it wasn't as publicized. And so we have Judy having to stand up for herself. And we also see our character standing up for her as well. It is a very real thing to be portrayed, and it is a very real aspect of the queer community historically and now. The first trans person that I ever got to know was the brother of a friend of mine who I met in 1996 when I was 16. He was a charming gay trans man. He was a sweet nerd who wrote Garrick and Bashir fan fiction. And I remember him telling me, he was in his early 20s. I was a naive 16-year-old. And he was explaining to me about the prejudice that he faced in the gay community. And how, they mostly weren't accepting and, would say they didn't understand why he would transition if he wanted to date men. Because obviously it's because gender and sexuality are separate things, and you can be both gay and trans, as he was and as Judy is in the film. But unfortunately, not everyone understands that. That was 1996, but it still happens today. Just a few months ago, we had that article in the BBC that was claiming that lesbians were feeling forced by some trans women to date trans women, which the article was entirely bullshit. Badly, faulty gathered statistics in a survey run by a hate group, and the sources included a known sex offender. It was trash. But it was still made it into the BBC, and the BBC are still defending it. Thankfully, a lot of us stood up against and said that that's not right. And I hope that nowadays the majority of the community is with solidarity. We got to stand for solidarity, but solidarity is hard. And we have failed our siblings in the past plenty, and the film includes that. I said it's a film of its time, and that is for better or for worse. And it's also aspects that are still true today, for better and for worse. And yet, it is aiming for a happy ending. And that is this film. It is unflinchingly sincere to the point of camp, while also being, something you can enjoy from a camp lens and from a, that's very sweet lens. And I appreciate that. It feels very Canadian. It feels very 90s. It feels very, and it is extremely queer. And I really enjoy it. And I think that a lot of you out there would probably also really enjoy it. And naturally, watching a film that is, from this very specific time and place, and especially a film that I've watched, I watched at the time while I was so deeply in denial and confused. One of the reasons why I wish there had been good bisexual representation is maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe it would have been nice to see something that looked familiar and not. Well, I know I'm not her. Yeah, I don't know that. the perpetual story of the late bloomer. I was confused, but aside from personal reflections, I sort of reflect on the community as a whole and the world as a whole. Where are we? In the 23 years since this film was made, how has things changed? For one, films made now with trans women are usually star trans women actors or non-binary actors as well. We're still not having enough trans people in getting representation, but it's just better than it was. I think, films made today do have better bisexual representation. Not a lot better, but there are improvements. The bad side of things that have changed and things that haven't, because a lot of these bookstores aren't around anymore. And it wasn't customs that killed them. For a lot of them, it would have been Amazon and capitalism. And then there are the things that have not changed, or in fact have gotten worse. The skinheads that are a perpetual problem in this film, they're not shaving their heads anymore. They are wearing red hats. They are gathering to go to Pride. Or they are wearing suits and passing laws. And it's hard, I think, to be hopeful. It's hard. It's not hard to be proud at Pride, but sometimes it's hard to be hopeful. So I think to that writing retreat, that Maggie Thompson and Sharon McGowan were at, where they were thinking, let's write a lesbian story with a happy ending. That's an act of faith to be doing that in 1993 when they decided to make it in 1999. It's an act of hope. And I think as much as we need Pride, we also need faith and hope. We need to write our stories with happy endings. And we don't have to write them entirely happy. And we don't have to write them to suit the straight gaze. We don't have to do Disney shit and make it all rainbows, but it doesn't have to be rainbows in a kid-friendly way. It can be rainbows and reality. We can be authentic. And maybe we need those Disney-fied stories too. But we need to find hope and to keep fighting. We always say that the first Pride was a riot. But the thing that I remember about, the history that I've read about that riot, is not the, question of who threw the first brick. What I love is the story about how the street queens and and all the hustlers and the people who were on the street to fight back against the cops, a lot of them linked up arms and did a kick line. They sang out in defiance. And there is the joy of people singing together, but also when you think about the act, what a kick line is, it's a bunch of people linked together kicking. And when people are linked together, you can't get them alone. And they were singing, "We are the Stonewall Girls. We wear our hair in pearls. We wear no underwear." I love that story because I love the defiance in that. We say Pride is a protest as if that isn't also a party. And what makes Pride special is that it is both, because sometimes partying is a protest. Sometimes writing an honest story with a happy ending in a time when all the officials and the powers that be are saying that your love is obscene. And you go, no, I'm going to write a happy love story, and I'm going to include you telling us that our world is obscene. And I'm going to do it from a queer lens and show that queer life is just life, and the obscene thing is trying to suppress it. The obscene thing was those customs, the officials. The obscene thing is those skinheads and their modern descendants, whether they're, trying to sneak in and cause trouble and with violence, or whether they're committing violence through the institutions of law. That is what's obscene. And so I give you this film that most of you have probably never heard of. And I hope you can find it. But even if you can't, watch other films. Watch the happy stories and the real stories too. And write your own. And hopefully, looking back on this moment in, 23 years, we'll be talking about how we defeated the laws that are coming now, the way that Little Sister's books defeated the customs laws that were happening then. That's my rant for Pride. So, once again, I wish you the happiest of Prides.